We are back in session. And we've got a couple more items that we need to take care of. Let's get the work sessions out of the way because we kept Connie tied up all day. So Connie, if you would, you and Mr. Wood, the proposed solar energy ordinance.
Okay. I think all of y'all have got a copy of it. This is the recommendation from the planning board, and you had a public hearing on a draft a few months ago. It might have been more than a few, might have been maybe back as far as February, but it went back to the planning board for them to look at.
We got to find it in here.
Okay.
What page is it?
108.
But they looked at it and made some changes, and we had a representative from one of the solar companies at the planning board meetings when we were talking about it. So they're, at least that one representative is satisfied with what we've got this time. Of course, I've been tied up with some other issues, so that's why it's taken so long to get back to you. But what we've got and what this will do is, well, two things. One that's outside this ordinance, but that we wanted to do was add solar energy facilities or solar farms, as there's a lot of times known, as a permitted use in 3 zones and a special use in 2 other zones. Permitted use in heavy industry, light industry, and airport industry, and then as a special use in RA 30 in airport. Seymour Johnson has looked at this. They are okay with what we've got here, and what we would be doing anytime someone wants to put one in Wayne County that's in the Seymour Johnson flight area. We would notify them. They may have already been notified, but we would get a comment back from them that they don't have any objection to it. And the ones I've seen lately, everything I've seen come through, they've not had any problems with it. You would think, well, they're going to have a problems with reflectivity, but they don't, because, when they're building these panels, they don't want to reflect. They want all the sunlight to be absorbed for energy. They don't have an issue with the height or them attracting birds or anything like that, with other uses. So they're okay with these in and around Seymour Johnson so far that I've seen anyway. What this would do is, as I said, they would, if they're in a zoned area, they'd have to comply with the zoning ordinance as far as being permitted use. The minimum size for a facility will be 10 acres if it's the primary use. If it's an accessory use, if it's somebody's putting one on their home or for their own personal use, then they're not regulated by this. So somebody just for their own personal use is outside this ordinance. As I said, everything would go to Seymour Johnson for them to give a comment on. All the improved areas, and the improved areas are those areas actually where the panels sit inside the fence. They would have to be at least 100 feet from a public road and 50 feet from a fence line. So inside the fence, where would they put the fence? If they put the fence at the property line or set back from the road or something, it would be the closest panel to the fence could be 50 feet. Improved areas shall be at least 150 feet from any residential area, building, or churches. So from the church into the property, we would measure from the church or the adjoining building or adjoining residential area. Residential area is defined as any area within 1/10 of a mile of a solar energy facility having 25 or more dwellings. So it would not be able to go right up next to a subdivision. It'd have to have a buffer sitting back from the subdivision, but it could go next to an individual house, provided there was 150 feet. But this would sort of keep it away from a subdivision area. It says it would have if it is in a residential area, or that it would have a landscape buffer of 50 feet so with evergreen trees and bushes. The buffer should not be required if the solar energy facility is in an industrial, agriculture, or forest commercial area. And then if they decide to put up a solid fence around all or part of the property, then the buffer would not be required. We had some discussion earlier about fencing. All of the companies that I've had dealings with, they're going to be putting up a fence anyway, just for their own security reasons. And this would deal with the type of fence. We would allow them to put up the type of fence they want, whether it be just a wire fence or an opaque fence, solid fence or whatever. That's their choice on that. The planning board would be the one that they would approve all the site plans on this as it comes through. The developer would give us a site plan or give my office one, and we would look to make sure it complied with the ordinance and work with the developer if it didn't. And then the planning board would give final approval on that. They would have to obtain the driveway permit if there was not already a driveway there. We would like for the design of the material, construction of the materials to blend in as much as it can with the surroundings. We don't want anybody to go out there and paint theirs pink or something like that that's going to really stand out. And these are big enough as it are without having to draw attention to themselves. And let's see what else I got here. I think that's it on that. Because of all the changes we've had since the last public hearing, I believe it would be best if we schedule another public hearing for, if your board agrees, for some time in maybe September or something. And we would notify, put out ad in the newspaper like we did before.
Any questions for Mr. Price?
Oh, yes. But I'll let you start.
Okay. Oh,
I'm still reading.
you're still reading? On page 109, under the section 5 location, item F, the improved area shall be at least 150 feet. Was that not one of the reasons why we sent it back to the
Well, it
planning
was,
board?
but what we had before was 300 feet.
Okay.
So we've gone from 300 down to 150.
And
And schools were removed since you're getting ready to build two.
Before we said you couldn't be, you had to be 300 feet from the school, so we took that out.
And on item E, I still have some issue here on the 100 feet, and especially 50 feet from the fence line. The only way to get that closer is to put up an opaque fence, which would be 20 feet, but is there any other avenue that a landowner can take to reduce that 50 feet? Because all these landowners are telling me that if they got a 100-acre farm and they're having to set this thing back 50 feet from the fence line, they're losing a lot of money. They're losing a lot of acreage there. And I just feel like it's excessive. My other question is that I stated this a few months ago, that we don't need to regulate this any more stringent than we do turkey or chicken houses. If we don't have any restrictions on those, then we don't need any on these, on the solar farms.
Well, one thing with these, and I talked with Alan Lumpkin a little bit about that.
Yeah.
You know, how these new places going in, how they might affect property values. And he said, but right now they are so new, they haven't had any comparable sales, and so they don't know if they would make any difference or not. If you had a house next door to one of these, is it gonna make any difference on the value of your house when you try to sell it? 7 or 8, 10 years from now, we'll vote. But by that time, if one comes in next to your house, it may be too late for you. If there's not an opportunity to put up a fence or a screening of some sort to protect the value of your property. And that's part of what's driving this, is to protect the value of the properties next door. Not that these by themselves are going to be harmful, but them going in, what's it going to do to the property next door?
Okay, but, Mr. Chair.
Yes, sir.
I follow it, but how does this, what we're looking at, compare to chicken and turkey.
Well, on livestock, on poultry houses, chicken, livestock, or whatever, there is no setback at all. Because as through zoning regulations or whatever, counties are prohibited on doing anything on those facilities, agricultural facilities. If you wanted to put something in on a turkey house, you couldn't.
But what we're saying here is that we had rather see a turkey or chicken house beside a subdivision than we had a solar farm,
Well,
which
not-
doesn't make any sense to me.
Well, I don't think we're saying that. I think we're just saying that we can't do anything about the turkey houses.
I understand, so that's why I'm really saying that we're over-regulating, in my opinion, the solar farms because of that. I think it needs to be, I'm gonna be honest with you, it needs to be, not 150 feet. I think 100 may work, even 50, but 100 should work. But the 50-foot property line from the fence line is where I have a problem, because the solar people that I've talked to, the actual solar panels, they're gonna put up a fence anyway. The solar panels are actually 20 feet, if I remember correctly, from their own fence line. So why do we need to regulate it anymore?
I think just for the setback of trying to protect the adjoining property.
Okay. But I just don't agree with it, I'm sorry.
Mr. Zerner.
I concur with those same concerns. It's my understanding that you can build a building 60 feet off of the right-of-way of a highway or a road, state maintained. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
And so I don't see why we would restrict any more on the construction of a solar farm. 60 feet is acceptable there, and I think 60 feet should be acceptable here. And I know it sounds like very small potatoes in regards to 40 feet, but you take 40 feet on a large tract of land that is undevelopable is a great deal of income to that property owner. And sidelines, well, if you've got 50 feet off this sideline, 50 foot off of that sideline, there's 100 feet right there that you are losing, plus the 50 feet on the back property line. So I think my concern is that we are over-regulating. I understand the concern in regards to property values, but you're right. Nobody knows how it may affect property values. And if in fact it is considered an eyesore to a property owner, they can always put up a screening on their side of the property. Because it's not a matter that you have anything other than a sight objection, because you don't have smells, you don't have noise, you don't have these other offensive items to contend with. It would actually be whether or not, but that'd be no different than if I go and on the property back there and I build a ugly building with polka dots on it. And it may be you may not like it. If you don't, you can just screen it off. So I just think we're putting too much restrictions in here. The other issue that I have is item D, where it says that there'll be a comment from Seymour Johnson. I agree with that. However, let's give a specific number of days that they have to comment, and in the absence of that comment, they may proceed on. How long will they have to comment? So I think we need to put in that comment period be open for 30 days or some time period.
Well, that's reasonable, because the federal government does that now with the ones we get from them.
Saying that you basically have so many
Not
days.
the federal government, it's the Public Utilities Commission on windmills and things like that. So it'd be, and I don't believe that's even 30 days, is it? It's more like 20.
Well, I think we need to have a specific.
But 30 days would be ample time for them to review that.
But typically, the bases always responded pretty quick. When when I was on planning board, normally they respond pretty quick on stuff.
Yes.
I mean, I'm not saying don't put a number of days on it, I'm not saying that, but typically they've always responded pretty quick.
Yeah.
Well, I just think we need to have a specific days in there. The last question that I have would be on on F, it says improved areas shall be at least 150 feet from any residential area, building, or churches. Now, is that 150 feet from their property line? Or is it from the actual building itself?
From their building,
From their building?
yes.
From their panels.
Yes. Well, from the panels to the closest building.
Right.
So if somebody's got a 70-foot backyard next to one of these, and you've got a 50-foot buffer, well, there's 120 feet separation there. So then you would have to have 30 more feet.
But I disagree with the 50-foot buffer.
I'm just saying that's what as it is right now.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. I think if somebody's going to object to a solar farm being there, whether or not you've got it 20 feet, 50 feet, or 150 feet, they're gonna be looking somewhere else, if they're that objectionable to the solar farm. I have no problem with it. I want it as least restrictive as possible. That's my concern. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Page.
I won't beat that dead horse any longer because I had the same thing that's underlined in yellow on the size and the setbacks and all that. I thought it was a little bit much. But my question is those that are already existing, will this put them out of the ordinance? Will they not meet it, or, because we can't go back? You see what I'm saying?
Well, it may, I mean, I'd have to go back and look at them.
We couldn't go back and make them.
No, they wouldn't have to go back and change anything, but if they filled up all their land they have and there's no room for expansion, it's sort of a non-issue.
I just wanted to make sure they wouldn't be in violation.
Well,
Something that we're
I'd
trying
have
to
to
put in
look at
place
them on
now.
an individual basis. As I recall, the ones that are out there, that at least in the county's jurisdiction, they would comply with this anyway.
Okay. That's one.
Because it
I haven't been
most-
out there and really looked at it, so I'm not sure.
I know the one on 70 is sitting way back off the highway, so I know it's far enough off the highway, and it's far enough from any adjoining buildings.
Is this gonna be a separate ordinance or part of the zoning ordinance?
It would be, this part would be a separate ordinance, but we would just be adding to the list of permitted uses in the zoning ordinance,
Okay.
so that if someone wanted to go in on the property next to the school, let's say, where we have zoning, and wanted to establish one there,
Right.
they'd be able to do it. Right now, they could not.
But all the additional regulations would be a separate ordinance?
That's correct, yes.
Okay.
And just one final thing. Let's call them facilities and not farms.
Well, right, that's what I've got on here.
I know you got it right.
Yeah, we just need to call it, that's what Kevin suggested, call them solar facilities.
Mr. Darby.
I did have one more question mark up here. Why are we establishing 10 acres as a minimum size?
That was actually something that Mr. King suggested.
Yeah, you did.
For what reason?
I think just to keep one from coming up next to somebody's house, you know, like if somebody had an acre next to your house, somebody taking that acre and putting one there.
Well, economically, it wouldn't be feasible to, would the economics of it prevent them
I
from
don't know.
doing it?
I mean, I don't know. I guess as they get enough of the bigger places and start going down to smaller places, smaller places will become more attractive. But there's nothing set in stone about 10 acres. It could be 5 acres, it could be 20 acres, or whatever, it could be done away with. But that, I mean, that's,
Yeah.
it's something, I think he suggested that just to keep the small ones from popping up everywhere.
I don't know the economics of it, so maybe that you have to have 20 acres. or
And that
more
may
to
be
do it.
currently based on the market right now, you probably have to have 20 or 30 acres to make it work now based on what,
When you had the gentleman that was from, from the solar industry,
they didn't have any problem with 10 acres, because they're.
did they have any comments on the 10 acres?
No, they were fine with that, because everything I think they're doing now is 30 acres and up, so I guess they saw that as keeping the 10 acres out and keep out competition.
The roof of a school is under 10 acres.
Mr. Chairman.
But we took schools out of it.
Mr. Gerthen.
Mr. Price, and Board, I agree we need to do a comprehensive evaluation of this ordinance and put a lot of thought in it. Mr. Price, have you run this past the School of Government with any discussion.
No, I haven't.
Would you think it'd be a benefit that we run these questions that we get asked to the school of government, get a little input from them?
Well, they have there is a model ordinance that they and representatives from the solar industry
Right.
came out with for counties or cities that wanted to do something. I think I've got it in my folder over there. And this would be more restrictive than what's in the model ordinance. You can go back to that. You can, I mean, there's a lot of options you
Yeah.
have. One of them is just not do anything.
I think it'd be a good comparison if we could kind of see some of these frequently asked questions that we're seeing today, maybe be some trials and.
So you are acknowledging this is more restrictive than what is the recommended order?
Yes, sir.
Well, I don't want to be more restrictive than anybody else in town. I mean, we want to be competitive. After all, this does generate some tax revenue for our county.
Well, and I agree. If you think, and I do, that there is a need for an ordinance to regulate the placement of them, then you've got to find a balance between something that's way over here and something that's way over here. And I may be over here, and you might be over here, so depending on which way you look at it, but,
Connie, what might be helpful is if we had a list, just in order of how it comes up in the ordinance, of where we differ from the model ordinance that the school government has. And that way, I think you could then zero in on what the differences are, and I think that's what I'm hearing you
Yes.
you say.
yeah, I think, Mr. Girl, I think regarding your question, I don't know if it would do any good to send this up there. They're just gonna look at it and say, okay, in comparison with our model ordinance, which is not in state code or anything. It's not like some other rules that we have that says you have to have a 50-foot riparian buffer, 50 is 50, and you could go 60, but 50 is what the state law says. In this case, there are no state administrative rules or general statutes dealing with this at all.
I'd feel good if you maybe just cross-reference it, and that way we see some kind of balance maybe.
Then we can see where the differences are between their model ordinance and this one. And if you do it by section, that way everybody can go to the specific language we have and
Right.
then what the difference would be.
And in my looking at it, I don't recall that there would be anything in the model ordinance dealing with military installations. So if we do something and require a comment from Seymour Johnson, even if it is waiting for 30 days, that's obviously something that's going to be more restrictive here than it might be over in Greene County.
That's
But
gonna be, if it's within the flight zone or whatever, that's already taken care of.
well, right, they have to, when they're getting their permit from the Public Utilities Commission, I think Seymour Johnson gets notified of it then. And so I've got a letter the other day, a copy of a letter that Dennis Kitson did to Seymour Johnson on 4 of the sites here in Wayne County, and they said based on those locations, they did not have a problem with it.
So that wouldn't fall under our ordinance we've already got in place for sound and height and all that?
Well, they're all under 500 feet.
I know that, but it's still,
They don't have to get I guess, if they came in to get a permit from us for anything, right now, they don't have to get any permits to us because they're not building anything. Yeah, they get a driveway permit from DOT, that's usually sometimes the first time we know about it.
Mr.
Now, most of the time, we don't see it until.
I like Mr. Grove's idea about the UNC government thing. Do we not have any cross-references we can do with other counties that are surrounding us that got ordinances now?
Well, I've
In
checked.
terms of setbacks, that's the thing that I'm concerned about.
Well, in the counties around us that don't have any zoning, they don't have anything, it's not adopted anything.
Okay, so everybody else has got one?
I think we're leading the pack on this.
Oh, okay. Blazing that trail again.
That may be why they're waiting for us to do it.
Well, sometimes it is, somebody's got to step out, and be first, and there's nothing wrong with being first.
Well,
If you're not first, you're last.
I know there was an article in the newspaper, it might be in the Tribune, but it was a county that was near us. There was a real outcry in the neighborhood about putting one within sight of some people's houses. And so it's one of those things that's gonna be controversial the way you look at it. But what I wanted to do, I guess, just to ask you all informally, like if 150 is too much, from 0 to 150, what do you think it ought to be? I'm just curious. Just if the numbers that you see here, what would they be? What would they be? What would you want them to be? And then Mr. Price would sort of have as he go and look with what the state may have, we have a better feel of what, in writing, what you all thought. So we can say, well, maybe that's too much, but if you don't go ahead and say what that something is, then it won't be helpful as it studies some more if you won't sit there at the table. So that's what I was after. Just what do you think a number ought to be?
If you got a 25, 30 acre piece of property, and you're looking at putting a solar facility on it, 150 feet is a long ways. But if you live right beside one of them, 150 foot is not very far. So like Mr. Kamar said, it's gonna be controversial. I mean, there's no way we're gonna win on this.
That's why it might be good to let's do that comparison with what the model ordinance is, because that may give you some guidance ahead on what they feel is appropriate on that.
I agree with that.
Yeah,
That's
Mr. Cromartie, the way I look at it, if it's 60 feet off of a public
Yeah.
right-of-way, it
Yeah.
ought to be 60 feet from adjoining buildings on the side. So 60 feet is kind of the number I would be, if I had to,
Yeah.
one. But number two, I'm not so sure that I'd want to put anything in that line item as far as any improvement within so many feet of any residential area, any building or any
Which one is
church.
that? I'm sorry, which one is that?
That's F. I don't
F.
know that I'd want to even put anything on that line. I mean, some of these lines I may want to eliminate, but I'd like to see what the recommendation
What do you,
is.
yeah.
And
Because we already heard that this recommendation is more stringent than what the Institute of Government is recommending. I really want to see what they did and see what the comparison is.
Well, Connie, would a couple of weeks
Come
be
back.
I
sufficient
could
for
be
the
ready
next
for next
meeting?
meeting.
Why don't we come back at the next meeting and have that comparison for you then?
Sounds good.
All right, we'll do it.
Thanks, Tom.
Okay. North Carolina Association of County Commissioners, legislative goals and process.
Which one of these? Okay. Mr. Chairman, this is the NCACC's normal policy every year. This is their process they go through. This is the start of how their legislative goals and priorities are established each year. And the way they started is simply to ask that any Board of County Commissioners submit any item that you would like a committee of the NCACC to study and make a recommendation on as to whether we should pursue legislation at the General Assembly to implement. And so with that in mind, what we're trying to do is before the deadline in September is submit anything that you would like to see on that. In discussing it, Connie and I have a couple of things we'd like you to consider, and then there may be others that board members want to look at as well. The first one I wanted you to think about is, and we've had multiple discussions about this, and that is the North Carolina DOT's funding formula, as y'all know, was changed recently. And based on that, it doesn't appear like Eastern North Carolina will fare very well for years under that policy, that most of the money appears to be going to the major metropolitan areas, which primarily means Charlotte and Raleigh and Greensboro. So
if you would like to have that policy changed. Now, that may be an administrative policy and not spelled out in the state legislature, but they can go after those as well. It's anything we want to see changed in state government that affects us. So I would just suggest that we put down as one of our goals for the NCACC to look at is under their transportation committee is review the statutes and the administrative regulations dealing with the funding formula for state transportation funds.
I agree.
That includes all, example, airport as well. Yeah, it's state and federal. Yeah, you can. I guess primarily, Joe, I had in mind roads, but we can certainly include airports as well. I think it will impact them as well in the near future. Okay.
The formula is the same, I believe, isn't it? Isn't the formula the same? I don't know.
Yeah,
Because I've seen
it is airports,
Yeah.
railroads, and.
Yeah, because they're all listed on the same project
Yeah,
list. Yes,
Okay.
that's true, we do need to include.
okay. So that would be one I throw out for your consideration on there. And there's been one other that we've also had some discussion on, and.
Mr. Chairman, before we go over to the
Yes.
next item, can we be a little bit more specific in regards to possibly recommending how we would want it changed? In other words, not only are we against it because we know we're not gonna fare very
Right.
well, but, could we possibly make some recommendations of how to tweak the formula to where it would be fair?
You can do anything you want with it. The only thing I would caution you about is you got to get a majority of votes within the NCACC to get this thing adopted. So, I don't know, I'm not quite sure how to advise you on that, Joe. I guess what I'm saying is, I see your point. I'm just wondering about if we get too specific, we may in fact drop some people who might have supported it on a broader basis, but won't support it if we come up with a specific solution. But you could say that it needs to be changed, and then your suggestion is such and such, you know.
Well, here lies the problem, and that is, even if you've got that pressed through and DOT says, we agree and we'll address it, the same people that came up with this original form are the ones that's gonna tweak it.
Right.
And, I mean, it was designed for a purpose.
Right.
And the purpose was to address transportation needs where the populace is.
Right.
So that meant that it was more monies going to Charlotte, to the metropolitan areas versus the rural areas. And that's why we are suffering.
Right.
So somehow that formula's got to be changed to give more emphasis on the economically deprived areas over those that have already attained economic solve. Now, I mean, I almost think we need to define in some ways where we have objections to it.
Right. Well, rather than try to write that, I think what I would suggest is that you determine what the outcome is you'd like to see.
We want some money.
Well, exactly. But I think that's the key is you want to talk about the outcome you want, how they go about getting there. You know, they may.
Leave it up to them.
They may want to tweak that a little bit.
I understand.
But I think you'd have greater support too from other counties if you just came out and said exactly what you're saying is. The formula basically doesn't give us much of anything.
It doesn't.
Going forward.
It does not take into consideration that the transportation funding is the leg up that Eastern North Carolina needs
Right.
in order to improve our economic standing.
And the same thing with Western North Carolina. I
Well,
think.
agreed.
Because, I mean, basically what you're looking at, it's the Piedmont Triad area is where the money's going.
Well, we want to word it in such a way that those areas in the western and the eastern section, there are more counties there, more votes
Right.
to support that than there
That's
would
right.
be in those metropolitan areas.
That's
So
right.
if you were encouraging them to sign on, it would be from that standpoint.
Mr. Marty, and then
I'm sorry.
somebody,
I want to ask Ms. Doctor, speaking of a specific, if instead of population, what if it was potential road mileage, geography? That would, if east of 95 makes up X amount of square
Right.
whatever, if we looked at it rather, because in Raleigh and Durham, and it's gonna be more highly populated. But the high population in my mind, doesn't create expense for building a mile of bridge. So if you had, and I'm just asking this question, if we want to be more specific, I'm just asking the question, would it be better to argue on geography versus population?
My feeling on that is we might actually hurt ourselves, because the justification for roads is traffic,
Traffic.
is moving people. And so if you argue it on geographic grounds instead of population, the engineers are gonna come back at you and say, well, you're building a road and it doesn't have near the carrying load that this one has. And so in a cost-benefit analysis, we would lose on that. I think you're better off just to make the pure argument that we still need some money in these other areas in order to have more economic development, because you're not going to be able to match them on the transportation issue part. Their traffic counts, by definition, are going to be much higher than ours. And so you can't do it on a strictly engineering basis, I guess what I'm saying. So I agree with Joe, you're going to have to push the economic development aspect of it, because if you're doing it strictly on who needs the capacity, the urban areas are going to win that argument. Because if that's, I think that's what the formula is now. As you said, they're putting it where the traffic is. And if you do that, we're going to lose.
The only place the Piedmont's going to money spending in the east is on 264 and 40. So they can go to the coast.
Yeah.
Could we enlist the help maybe of Durwood Stevenson?
Sure.
To try to help us, if we can define it, define something specific that would generate more counties in the west and the east
Right.
that would support the motion. But at the same time, obtain what we're after, and that is a bigger piece of the pie.
Of the pie. And what I was going to suggest is, you've got a transportation committee meeting, I think, on the 21st. We don't have to turn this in until September. I was going to suggest we get a recommendation back, and that would give you and I time to talk with Durwood and some other people and see how we go about that.
We can craft it in such a way that it'll be a little bit more specific.
Right. But I would just stress that I wouldn't try to get into designing the formula for them. I would get into what's the end result you want, what's the outcome you want. Let them figure out how to deal with that.
Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, I think we're gonna need to do exactly what Commissioner Daugherty said. We gotta do this based on economic growth.
Yeah.
Plus, somebody in the DOT needs to understand that this formula that's being used is directly against what our governor has told us in Kinston before he was elected, that he wanted to see development east of I-95. It's not going to happen unless we get the money for infrastructure. We are dead in the water on economic development east of I-95 unless we can get the infrastructure in place. And we can use that as a reason too when we present this.
Any other comments?
So what I'm hearing you say there is you'd like us to work with Durwood Stevenson, Joe is the Transportation Committee Chair, myself, and probably Connie, and let's see what we can come up with, have something back to you probably for the first meeting in September, because your committee will meet after our next meeting here, which is the 19th. Your committee will meet the 21st, and we really need to have a recommendation back from them at the September meeting, and then we can turn this in. Is that what I'm hearing you?
Either or, if you can get a recommendation for our next commissioners meeting, let them pass a resolution and then take it to the transportation committee. I mean, whichever way you feel
Okay.
appropriate.
And I would ask to get Tim Little's input too. I think it would weigh heavily with us as well.
Yeah. Okay.
And
I think
also,
I would prefer to run it through your committee first, and then
Okay.
let them
Okay.
recommend what to do here,
That's fine.
because I'd like to get their feedback on it.
Okay.
And we also need to, our elected officials in Raleigh, which they're quite aware of our feelings in the east, but we don't need to let that get stagnant. We need to, in a politically correct way, just keep it on their mind that,
Right.
eastern, not only Wayne County, but eastern North Carolina, because
Right.
this has got to be a group effort. I mean, we can't be selfish and just say we want it for Wayne County. This is eastern North Carolina.
Well, and that's why I thought you should try to run it through the ACC's legislative policies, because if you've got to have allies to change this.
Yeah.
And the way to do that is go through the NCACC, and I think we'll have more allies who like the formula about as well as we do.
Well, there's more rural area than there is metropolitan. I mean,
Correct.
The votes is there if you can just get the troops together.
Yeah, I think when this first round of funding came out, I think it stunned a lot of people.
Stunned me, that's for sure.
We were down in Jacksonville, you remember? At a meeting down there, and they were as upset as Wayne County.
Sure.
So,
And I think that's the reaction you're probably gonna see.
yeah.
I'll be surprised if you don't have other people filing a similar thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
The second one is, I'm gonna turn it over to Connie to talk about this one. We've had some conversation before.
I think that's probably one of Mr. Mayo's pet peeves, is finding a way to have streets that are built in developments added to the DOT system. The planning board is working on a change to the subdivision ordinance that will take care of streets going forward, requiring the developers to do some more than what they've been doing. And so DOT will, occasionally take over streets. We got a letter in this week from one that was 2 streets that will be taken over at Mears Bluff, but it's a slow process. And you have to have a certain number of houses out there. You've got to have the streets in certain condition. And what our subdivision ordinance requires is when you're building a subdivision, put in streets. You have to put in paved streets. You have to put in paved streets that are built with DOT standards. And we get a letter from them stating that as of that date of that letter, the street is built to their standards. The only thing that's preventing it at that point from being accepted by DOT is having a certain number of houses on that street and a petition from the developer or the property owners. So what happens if the developer does not stay on top of it? Time moves on, streets start to deteriorate, driveways are put in at the incorrect size, brick mailboxes are put up, and then you start getting potholes. Residents call up here, call y'all, want to have the street taken off, we want the street fixed, and we're not in the street business. So if there was a way, once the street is built, then there was not a delay, the developer could petition then, once they issued the letter saying the street is built to our standards, they could, if the developer wanted the street taken over, he could go ahead and petition then, and not have to wait for houses to be built for that street to be taken over. And going back to fix those and fix it at the state level would mean if there was a sufficient number, if the street was built to DOT standards at one point in 1989 or 1999 or whatever, and no one has ever petitioned, that DOT would be able to accept that street as it is right now, and then using normal maintenance to go in there and fix it if it's got potholes. And that would probably take a change at the state level in their subdivision road handbook. Because I'm sure you're gonna get pushed back from DOT on that. They'll say they've already got more streets than they can maintain already. They don't want to be throwing any more streets that may or may not have houses on it. But these will be streets that are occupied that have a dozen or 50 houses on it. And they're not taken over because the street has deteriorated from the time it was built in 1999 or whenever to now.
Connie, what you're saying is true, but there's cases in the county that the streets were paved to DOT specs. The number of houses were on the streets, and the DOT would come look at it, and they'd punch line you fix what they said, and they bring them back, and they punch line you again. And after a while, the developer gets frustrated. You know, he's done everything that the ordinances says do, and everything is in compliance. But there's been times that they just flat refuse to take them over.
All right, now I think they would need to find a way to make that easier on their point. I think they're probably pushing back because they probably don't want to take over any more streets.
Well, they don't,
They'd be
the state
satisfied
doesn't
if
have
you-
any more money. I mean,
If you
that-
close the door right now and say, we're not gonna take over any more streets, they'd be okay with that. Because they're not gonna get any more money if they took over 100 streets. But in a case of a subdivision that's been there, the developer has tried to get over, and maybe there's one or two things, a street was built to their standards to begin with, and something's held it up, they ought to be able to be, I guess in this case, have their hand forced and say, you need to take it over.
Mr. Mayor.
The subdivision developer, the way I understand it, is, there has to be like 12 or 15%, somewhere in that area of houses built in order to be petitioned to the DOT.
Right.
My understanding is that the streets in a subdivision have to be the DOT standards. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
So that don't hold water as if they're to DOT standards, and shortly thereafter, when 12 or 15% of the houses are built in that subdivision, to be sure, the streets are not out of compliance, as you're saying.
Exactly. That's exactly
Okay.
what, yes. You're
So,
right.
so what it means is that if they're out of compliance, it has to be other than the roads. It must be the driveway tile, because there's no restrictions on that. Am I correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
Could be a brick mailbox.
So any
Things like that.
15 builders build in a housing development, and they're using their own guidelines to put in driveway tile.
Correct.
These things need to be inspected by the DOT along with the roads. Now, one of the reasons that I've been given is why the DOT won't take over a new subdivision right after with no houses, but just a subdivision itself after the roads are paved and the elder utilities are put in, is that the reason they want to do the 12 to 15% is because a subdivision could sit there 5 years with no houses being built. So therefore, there's no growth in that subdivision to help pay for the maintenance that the DOT puts into it. They're requiring right now 12 to 15% of the development to have houses built on to help offset when they do take it over. And that's their rationale, okay?
I know at one
Which
time.
is flawed.
At one time, it was so many houses there was a length involved.
Per tenth of a mile.
Huh?
I think, two
Per-
houses per tenth of a mile.
Per tenth of a mile,
Right.
yeah, right. Is that still the case?
Yes, they've not changed their standards, probably for 25 years.
Chris Pendergraph, and I'm not speaking on what you're saying, but Chris Pendergraph told me specifically that in spite of what the county's interpretation is that it is 12%, that's what he told me, that their guidelines is 12% of the homes in a subdivision have to be built. Doesn't say in so many tenths of a mile or anything else. It's just a flat 12%, and we need to look into that to make sure that's the case.
I think if you do the math, though, 2 per tenth of a mile, it's gonna be that percentage.
I think you're looking at both, two different sides of the same slice of bread.
6 and 1, half dozen.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. I think when it works out, it's gonna be, both of you will be right.
Well, Connie, looking ahead, looking forward, is there anything we can put into our subdivision regulations that would require that these mailboxes be set off so that they remain in compliance with state law?
Well, the postal service is taking care of some of that. They're gonna require cluster boxes in all subdivisions. So there won't be a mailbox in front of anybody's house anymore.
Okay.
So there'll have to be a separate place where you pull in, get your mail, and pull back out and go on home.
Well,
Is that new subdivisions or all of them?
That's every subdivision throughout the United States.
So I won't have to put my mailbox there?
No, that'd be new. I'm sorry, that'd be new. They haven't
Your
pressed it down to
your
the existing.
grandfather.
They,
What I'm,
that was
what
my
I'm
question.
hearing you say is that the road is designed initially in compliance with DOT secondary road standard.
Yes,
But the two problems we're having is mailboxes, and the other is whether the tiles are installed properly to their standards.
that's right.
Now, who is inspecting the tiles? Is that our local building inspector?
No one's.
Nobody.
Well,
Nobody.
can't we add that to our subdivision requirements?
It already is, isn't it?
No.
No, they don't expect
No
driveway tiles.
requirement for
requirement.
any inspection on a driveway tile.
Well,
I think they
my
make sure there's
point-
one
but
there
My
that-
point is
Well,
that,
the individual coverages in some subdivisions, because I know the last one we
Well,
did,
they
it
may.
says in the covers that it's got to be DOT spec
Right, it
tile.
may be
But
in your
my point-
covenants, but it's not in your county.
but my
Okay,
point
all right.
is, if we're gonna start using special assessments to straighten these things out that are already in existence, we need to make sure that going forward, we're doing everything we can to make sure that we don't have these problems that we're facing in the future. And so, if the road is designed to DOT standards, which it is, because we require that as part of the subdivision requirements, what I'm saying is, why don't you require that the tiles have to be put in and inspected by our people who do the inspection on the house? And it's just like having a driveway permit, except that you're making sure that they're not messing it up, because if they do, if we come along, if this law is not changed, then let's say it's 8 years later, that subdivision still hasn't been taken into the state DOT system. What we're gonna face when we go to do special assessments is DOT's gonna come back and say, well, you gotta saw out these sections and repair this part of the road, but they may also hit you on, and you got 20 different driveway pipes here that need to be changed. And that's an expense to the property owner.
It is.
And may keep us from reaching the 75% petition that you gotta have in order to go in there and fix the roads. So what I'm suggesting is that have our subdivision ordinances amended to say that here's the standard on what we require, and it's the DOT standard. And then the building inspection department inspects that. And that way you avoid that problem on the back end. It sounds like what I'm hearing you say is the post office is gonna take care of the mailbox thing going
Right.
forward. And then we got less problems to deal with on the back end, because unless they change this statute or the administrative regulations DOT's operating under, which is gonna be an uphill battle, then we're still gonna have this problem. And as we start doing these street assessment petitions, you know, that we've talked about, that's in the statute to fix them, it's better for us to deal with those problems on the front end for anything that's new, rather than still keep chasing that rabbit 5, 6, 7, 8 years later.
Mr. Mayor.
And also to add to that, I was, rather than doing this through the NCACC, I thought maybe this might be a local, by county ordinance for us, because I know what you're saying, but also, as far as the DOT, they have the standards set themselves as to when they would take over a subdivision. The problem we have is right now it's voluntary. If a subdivision developer fills out the paperwork and sends to the DOT, what I'm saying is this is a local ordinance that we may be able to put into something into effect, like Johnson County, I'll use them again, that when 12% or whatever the DOT recommends of any homes in a subdivision are built on, any lots that are built on, that before Johnson County gives any more building permits for that subdivision, the paperwork is filled out and sent to the DOT that take over the streets.
Well, we're actually working on that now. The planning board has talked about it. We'll probably talk about it again at our meeting next week. So you actually may see something in 2 weeks on that.
Okay. And so I look at it as a local ordinance,
That-
county ordinance rather than
Well,
as a state
that part
thing.
is, but if you don't get the state, regulations changed to where they require this delay,
Oh,
that's
wow.
really what's creating a lot of the problem.
Oh, yes.
Because the difference is, for instance, if you develop a subdivision under the city standards,
Yeah.
you know, the city will go ahead and take it in.
Right.
When the developer finishes, they'll go ahead and dedicate the roads, water, sewer lines, all of that to the city, sidewalks. The city will go ahead and take it over at that point. And then the property owners don't have those problems, because if you start having potholes or whatever, you have a responsible party, which is the city,
Yeah.
ready to pave it. Our problem is with DOT requiring this delay, our homeowners are in limbo, is what it amounts to.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Doherty.
Literally is almost a conspiracy on the part of DOT not to take over these roads. Now, I'm telling you, you've experienced it, I've
It's
seen
a
it
nightmare.
firsthand. I have seen subdivisions turned down because the water flow of drainage on a ditch does not flow to their standards. And in order to change that flow, you're going to have to take up 3 driveway tiles because they did not have it elevated exactly right. And you can't get permission from 2 of those property owners in order to change them, so therefore the entire street is taken over. You're right, they don't want to take over the streets because they don't have the money to fix the streets they currently have. So it's almost a conspiracy to see that they don't take over the streets. With that in mind, I would highly suggest that our recommendation would be very explicitly stating that the DOT take over that street once it is constructed to their standards.
Right.
And once that's done, it's not a matter of petitioning, it's an automatic thing. Then it's a state street, and you will have to get a permit from DOT to put that driveway tile in. They will go out and inspect it to make sure it's to their standards, and you eliminate all these problems.
That's right.
The next problem you have is, if you'll read the regulation, it isn't the property owner, it's not the developer that needs to petition. It must come from the homeowners. So therefore, if you can't get the homeowners to make the petition, again, you're at a roadblock. So there are just so many roadblocks in the way this regulation is there, it creates the problem. And the end result is, we want to make sure that our property, individuals buying lots in subdivisions are protected to make sure their street is maintained. So I would suggest that we go for broke, that we ask that the legislators implement legislation that would require the NCDOT assume the street once it is built to their specifications
Right.
and accepted by them on the front end. That resolves the entire problem.
Well, it would, and the only thing that cities add to that is they have a 1-year warranty period. You know, the guy keeps you've got a bond to make sure you build it that
You gotta-
way.
yeah, that's
You keep
taken
a
care of.
1-year warranty bond in effect, and that way, if you start having street failures right away, he has to go in there and fix that, but the city has to notify you.
But the DOT could require that.
Yeah, that's a simple
You know.
thing to do. That's fairly standard in municipalities.
But
So I actually agree with what you're saying. That's why I thought it should be done at the state level rather than local. I don't disagree, Ray, about we can do some of the things locally about requiring it, but if you could get a change at the state level that required DOT to take them, that would negate having to do that.
Well,
And it would also negate having to have our inspectors do the tiles. My point there was simply, if they're not gonna change the law, then we should look at beefing up our subdivision ordinance to require inspection of the tiles, because we're gonna get right back into the example you cited, Joe, which is 2 or 3 homeowners
need to replace their tile, that means they've got to cut this paved driveway.
And they're not gonna do it.
And they're not gonna do it. And remember, that threshold for getting the approval of that petition is 75% of the homeowner. So it doesn't take a lot of people to kill it.
Well, I'm just saying, not only that, but let's talk about the proposed ordinance of the planning board stating that once it meets the current threshold of 3 residences per quarter mile or whatever that may be, if those 3 residents do not sign off on that petition, if one of them doesn't, that stops the entire process. Now you're saying that we want to put in a restriction on that developer that he no longer can get any more permits until those people sign that? You see,
No, until he files the petition.
but he
for
can't
the-
file the petition unless those people sign the
Yeah,
petition.
you can request the streets for them to come out without the lot owners, the property owner signing.
That is
Well, then
correct.
they've changed that, because it used to be
You
it
don't
had
have
to come from the property owner.
Well, if the developer has not sold all the lots, then he still is the property owner.
Right.
That's correct.
Right.
And to back up just a minute, you were talking about the water flow and all. That's taken care of in the plots and all now. I mean, the plats. You have to, whenever that plat is approved by the planning board, those ditches and waterways are designed to meet the DOT specs.
Oh, you're right. The problem you get is.
It's
what-
older subdivisions.
Well, is what he's telling you though is you have the design, but then the homeowner goes out and puts his drain tile in for his driveway, and nobody's checking to make sure he followed the design.
Well, let me go over.
Well, that falls under the contractor. I mean, the 99 out of 100 homes that's being built, the people that's building it, they don't have a clue about the driveway. It's the contractor.
Oh, I agree.
that-
But that's why I'm saying, I think if you don't get state law changed, then the fallback position, I think, needs to be beef up our subdivision ordinance to say that that's part of the building inspection process, and our building inspector has to sign off that you've installed the proper size pipe at the right elevation so that it follows the plan
Oh, but it's
as
not-
designed.
But it's not only that. Understand, when you sell a lot to a builder and they go out there and build that home, they landscape that.
Right.
Now, they landscape all the way out to the road, and so therefore, they landscape that ditch. And they change the grade on that ditch when they're landscaping,
Well,
and so
Which is
therefore
why,
prevents.
which is why somebody has got to be in place checking that. And the only people that'll be left, DOT is not gonna do it because they don't own it.
I know.
And so it basically falls on the county at that point the one place you can do it is during the building permit process, is you can require that they maintain the approved drainage system in there. And that's your reason for being able to regulate that. And then you stop those problems on the front end so that we don't have a petition fail on the back end because you got 7 people in there whose drain tiles would have to come up and they don't sign the petition. And they kill their 26%, that kills it.
But landscaping is involved, is what I'm trying to say.
So I agree.
The landscaping is not to grade, and therefore stops water from flowing on that drainage system. It's just so many things, so many factors here. We need the state to take it over on the front end, and that will resolve this.
I agree. All I'm saying is if they don't, because we're gonna get enormous blowback from DOT. If they don't, we need to have a plan B about
Okay.
what do we do.
That's fine.
Well,
Mr. Mayor.
can, while we're waiting maybe this 3 to 5 years before the state does anything, can we do something here in the county now and wait for them to do their thing?
Well, what I would suggest is you look at changing your subdivision ordinance to require that they maintain the drainage system and that our inspectors are charged with making sure that's done. How else are you gonna do it? Who else is gonna do it? DOT is not gonna come out there and do it. It's not their property at that point.
I've got Connie, you live up in the northern part of the county, and I got a subdivision in my district that has like 125 houses, and the amount of work that's gotta be done, the subdivision is 25 years old. the amount of work that's gotta be done to their streets. And they have called DOT out on 2 separate occasions over the last 3 to 5 years to do an assessment, which they would do. The DOT would come and do an assessment in a subdivision, give you a list of what you gotta do to get it in compliance. The key is that in this particular subdivision, it's gonna cost as much to get it to compliance as it would to repave it. So here you are, you know.
Well, and if you recall, and I haven't given you a detailed report on it yet, but I'm going to, we've talked about the statute where we can use special assessments.
Yeah.
And you can go out up to 10 years, allowing them to pay it off over a 10-year period. But essentially, that's the process you're gonna follow, because state law says, before we go out and authorize the work, we've gotta have DOT approval that if we do this work, that they agree, yes, it meets your standard, yes, we will take it into the system. And so they sign off on it. Then we go out, have the work done, bid it out, have the work done, and basically assess the people over the, over the 10-year period for the improvements.
Yeah.
And at least that does feather the cost out for them over a 10-year period. Now, that's the maximum length under the statute you can carry it out is 10 years. And I believe, Borden, I believe it was you who told me y'all have done some in the past, but you went up to 5 years. But what would happen is the county would borrow the money, go out, do the work. Once the work's completed, the roads are turned over to DOT. So going forward, they are in the secondary highway system, which is the residential street system. Then those folks pay the assessments over a 10-year period. After that, any improvements that need to be made to the streets beyond that is on DOT because they own them.
And-
So, I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman.
And one more thing that has not even been mentioned. There's streets in subdivisions that the state has taken over. They won't even work on them.
Yeah.
That's true.
Well, and
I mean, they go out with a pickup truck with a scoop of asphalt in it and throw a shovel full of 2 in a hole, take the truck and drive over and pack it,
Right.
and that's their way of correcting the problem.
yeah.
And they some in your district. I mean, that's.
Oh, I've had those
Yeah.
complaints. I've
I mean,
had those
the
calls.
state has taken them over, but they
Yeah.
still won't keep them up.
You know,
Well, and that goes back to what Connie said. I mean, we all know they're under fiscal stress.
The bottom line is, that,
That
we're not saying is follow the money. They don't have the money to do it.
They don't have
with.
the money to do it, and that's why they're balking at taking them in too. They've cut them back and cut them back to the point.
They can't.
They can't do it.
well, Wayne County's DOT repair budget, it's been cut 23%. So there you go.
Yeah.
This is for road repair.
That's right.
So it's not gonna happen. Be a lot of patching.
Well, that's why there's been discussion for the last, 3 legislative sessions about trying to give counties back the secondary road system, which the state took over in 1933. So, they readily, I mean, that's an acknowledgement, they can't afford it. And the reality is Medicare and Medicaid is eating our lunch at the state budget level, and it's crowding stuff out.
My goodness, I heard the word.
And so, that's been the problem for the last 3 years, 3 or 4 years in the budget. That's reality. It's eating the state's budget.
Connie, just come up with a solution and bring it back to us. Find the money.
Well,
Turn them all into gravel streets and go on with it.
but I think, going back, just to wrap up, I think going back to what Joe said is, the issue for us here is, what do we want to do at a statewide level at NCACC? The local stuff we can take care of here, depending on if this gets any traction. But at the state level, I think we're all saying the same thing, is the answer is DOT needs to have a process for more quickly taking them over.
Yes.
And that would solve a multitude of problems. So is that what, you want us to write something up to that effect?
Yes, sir.
I would.
Yes, and in fact, to be more specific, that they take them over as soon as
As they're through,
as they do their
and then have
inspection,
a
that
one-year
it meets
warranty,
their
have a
guidelines.
one-year warranty bond in place.
That's right, yeah.
And
I
it'd be
mean,
very similar to what cities do.
yeah, we don't want to streamline it to where that rather than taking 20 years to get a street, that it takes 10. We want to take it over right away, and we don't have to worry with it anymore.
Right.
But you could see the pushback from Chris Pendercraft at the first meeting that he attended, and I proposed that we talk to our legislators on that, and he about went berserk up there. They don't have the money to take it,
No.
but they need to.
But realistically, it's a problem we gotta solve for our citizens, and the state's gotta
Correct.
come up with the money.
Mr. Martin?
3 or 4 years ago, maybe 3, at the federal level, there was discussion about the infrastructure for America. Now, I know if we can't get nothing done in Raleigh, we're not necessarily gonna get something done in Washington. I'm not hopping from here to there. But as I sit here listening to us, we just don't need to be trying to impact Raleigh. But we're sitting here admitting that the DOT does not have the money. But as we approach another presidential election, maybe there should be a greater emphasis on, maybe the conversation need to be revisited about the fixing of infrastructure in America that our current president pushed for a while and got no traction. Because the very things that I hear us talking about today are the things that would have been taken care of in the fixing of the infrastructure of America from the federal level. It's some things the federal government gonna have to do. And I just want us as Wayne County Commissioners to start thinking about not following the talking points of people who say, keep the federal government out of our business. We need to be doing everything we can to get the federal government into our business and help us do the bridges and the roads. And maybe I see it backwardly, but if we can't afford to do it in North Carolina, we need to be talking to our our national elected people about going back and supporting conversations that I've heard about the infrastructure for America overall. You know, one of the biggest hearing cries is I think it was a bridge between Kentucky and somewhere else that those senators wouldn't sign off on, but it would have helped them. But they did not want to participate in what our president was talking about. But we stand at a point right now where Wayne County can't afford it, Raleigh doesn't seem to be able to afford it, and we must be too proud to discuss it with the federal government or get on board with the fixing of America. And we sit here right here saying we can't do it.
But I think the problem is the federal government doesn't have the money either.
I was figuring to say, what pot of money do you think they got that they're holding back on?
Well, you know, we
Listen,
just,
well, wait, let me say something. There's always a realignment of the dollars that we have. And I mean, it's easy to say that the federal government doesn't have it, but
you through?
yes, sir.
You've got our general idea on what, if you can, come up with something and
so.
you think you can have something back to them at the next meeting, a rough draft,
I
or
could
you
probably
think, or you
have
need a
that.
little more
I
time?
think what I'd like to do is have it to you at the first meeting in September.
Okay,
so that we
okay.
can-
Is that agreeable?
And then what I'll do is get with Joe and, on this other thing to run through his committee, if that's agreeable, on the first one we talked about.
You and Joe and Connie work it out.
Yeah, we'll work together.
Okay, who else has got something that they want to bring before the association?
Last time you talked to your representatives, you asked them to put some more of the lottery money back down here. Yeah, and it appeared to me
I don't-
the budget did that.
No,
Kind of went on deaf ears, didn't it?
Yeah, for schools, you mean?
Yes.
Yeah, we need to ask that again to replenish it the way it was.
That'll already be in there, because that's their number one priority.
Yeah.
And is to protect that every year. Okay.
Anyone else?
If I could, if I'm understanding the recent legislation, it allowed counties to vote on 2 1/4 cent sales tax. Is that correct?
I think that's right. There's so much floating out there. I wasn't 100%
I
myself.
think it's 1/4% sales tax for general use and 1/4 cent sales tax that could be designated either for school or transportation,
Right.
if I'm correct. Would you get that information
Yeah.
to us?
Yeah.
Anyone else? Mr. Curley?
Mr. Wood, can we add the 911 state fund to that as well?
Yes. More flexibility there. Okay.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Daugherty?
Since he brought that up, we're having some difficulty getting our elected officials to understand that. We met with Senator Pate and we discussed some of that, and I'm not sure that he and the other legislators are really understanding what the problem is. So maybe we need to get it as simplified as we can of what specifically we're looking for here. It's a confusing issue, because it seems like that they implemented a board that was supposed to authorize the expenditure of the funds. On the surface, to them, it looks like, well, we've already addressed it, and I don't think they understand how restrictive that board is on allowing us to use our own money.
Well, basically what that board did, the reason that board was created was they wanted to play Robin Hood. And so, because what happened is they basically took a lot of money from everybody and then set up a pot of money for grants. And those grants are going to the really, really poor counties who can't afford to operate a 911 system, and that's where that extra money is going. So it's penalized places like Wayne County and put the money in places like that. Now, the argument is that if you're traveling somewhere and you're out in the middle of nowhere, you still want 911 service. And so they'll argue that you're benefiting from that. But the reality is, some of these places, some of these really small counties, they need to get 3 or 4 of them together and have one 911 center, a regional center. Now, in fairness, the state's trying to push that and is using some of those great grants for that. But that's really, and Joe, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's the genesis of where all this came from. And so what they've been doing is squeezing us down and putting you in a straitjacket about what you can use the money for, and then saying you don't need all of that money, and so we can take it over here and play Robin Hood with it, and then we'll give it out in the form of grants. And so it's going to be very hard. I agree with everything you've said. I've argued for years we need to have more flexibility. I worked in Georgia for 7.5 years, and down there you can go up to $1.50. And it funds the entire operation. Our county down there was able to run 911 salaries, everything, for $1.50. Here, our fee is 60 cents. And they limit it because they converted it from a county fee to a statewide fee, and then that board controls the fee. And that board is controlled by the telecom industry, if you look at who's got the votes. Am I?
Yeah, the legislation changed some 4 or 5 years ago, and Representative Sager was in the House at the time. He had me appointed to a subcommittee of that 911 fund. And Mr. Wood's right, you've got an arena from A to Z, and Wayne County, like-sized counties in that middle part. You've got the large counties dictating how it needs to be on the large side, then you've got the smaller counties that can't afford anything, and we're having to supplement them. So you're right, we're caught right in the middle. It's going to take probably some time on our side to educate not only our legislators, but build a bond and partner with other counties and build it statewide. And
Yeah.
probably the best thing is to take it to the NCACC.
Yeah. Because ultimately, what needs to happen, you're either going to fund this stuff through the property tax, or you can take that fee up. And the fee is on every telephone, whether it's landline or cell phone. And so you can either support it through more of a user's fee, or you're gonna continue to support it more through property tax. Because as they take our money, that user fee money, you have to backfill that with property tax.
Mr. Chairman, and we got right where I wanted to be, and that is, should we not be possibly, rather than trying to reshape the wheel, advocate for another wheel? And that is, should we advocate for the flexibility of counties to implement an additional fee on top of that, that actually would go directly to the counties to offset cost of 911? So, in other words,
That the state fund doesn't apply,
In other words,
like
leave the state
for
fund
operating
alone.
expenses.
that's right, in
Yeah.
other words, you can swim against the stream
Yeah.
and try to get the current board in some way to change the regulations to allow us more of our own money back,
Right.
or go for an additional 911 fee called a local optional 911 fee.
User fee.
That any county could access up to a certain level,
Right.
that they could implement it, that those fees would go directly back to the county to offset their 911 fees. That way you get what the Ivory Tower in Raleigh allows us to have, but you would also have your fee that you could implement.
For the operating.
So I almost think it'd be better for us to just go for the optional fee, so that we could gain support from legislators to actually say, well, yeah, if they want to implement that on top of the current 911 fee to offset their cost, then that board can do so.
Now, I'm gonna stick my foot in my mouth.
Right.
The board that oversees these funds, it's almost like it's their money. You can, regardless of what your request is, there's a whole lot of please and thank yous got to be done. My opinion is have a clean slate, and let's get somebody on that board that can think rationally. I mean, have I said too much, Joe? Have I said it?
You're talking to that, Joe.
Have I said the truth, Joe? Okay.
Well, I mean, what y'all's thought of possibly going after a new fee? And could we get support of the majority of the counties to support that option?
Yeah,
I can't answer that.
I
don't know.
can't answer that either. You know, it's worth throwing it out there though, to see.
What's your thoughts?
Could we ask, one of the legislators have their legal to run it for us and see if it's possible?
Certainly, if you know one.
Yes, you certainly could do that.
We'll do that, Joe.
I mean, that way, if we can get that, then it gives us Plan B. Now, we can continue to advocate to get a larger percent of our money back, but in the
Right.
meanwhile, we've got another option.
Well, what we might do is put it in as, it's a high priority to continue with the flexibility. But if we can't get that, then we think consideration ought to be given to a user fee, a local user fee imposed by the county commission, so that, because they don't want to have to use property tax to fund these operating costs,
And
which
what-
the state fee doesn't cover.
Right.
And one of the restrictions is incoming calls. Every phone that I've ever used is two-way, but they've got it restricted to just incoming
Yeah.
calls.
Yeah, yeah.
Anyone else?
No, I reckon if we could solve those three for this year, that'd be good.
Okay.
You like
That's
that,
it.
Marcia,
Let's
don't
go
you?
to, I'm gonna hold Mr. Wood's comments off just a minute. Mr. Parker, I think you've got something that you want to present to the board that you've just found out this morning.
Yes, in a closed session, the board authorized the chairman and the manager to negotiate a settlement, a suit that was brought by the CI against the county. The suit had, the CI sued the county for $393,175.93. The plus interest, and quite frankly, it would take somebody who is a better mathematician than I to tell you what the interest was, but it would, ultimately, it was more than that 393. The county was able to settle the suit for $289, $289,138.12. So in the negotiation that took place, the county saved $104,037.81. And the county has someone other than CI that's performing the radio work for it. And I got a signed copy of the release and settlement agreement when I went back at lunchtime to my office.
So basically what you're telling us, that issue is behind us.
Yes, sir. And it was settled, in my opinion, at a very reasonable on the county's part.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Parker?
I would-
I'm gonna make some comments in an hour.
Okay. What was that figure, one more time? I'm not gonna ask you how you arrived at that.
12 cents, I learned.
It was 12 cents.
We settled it for $289,138.12.
There was a split the difference in there somewhere, Chuck.
Your chairman and your manager are very, very hard negotiators.
I don't think I've ever heard of a settlement that included cents.
You said, you told us to negotiate as hard as we could, and we took it down to the pennies.
Okay.
Okay, Mr. Wood, county manager's comment.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, I've got three things. One, just wanted to remind y'all, we got a letter on Charlotte Jenkins' retirement. She's been with Soil and Water Conservation Board, I believe it's 42 or 43 years. So she actually served the county longer than David. But the thing I wanted to make you aware of there is there's nothing we have to do on that. Under the statutes, the Soil and Water Conservation District Board makes that appointment.
Can we get a copy of who's on that board?
Yes, sir. We'll have Marcia get that for you.
Just for our information.
Sure. Okay, the second thing is Marcia is handing out to you two handouts. The first one is the one with the numbers on it. Wanted to go over with you. You had authorized, I believe it was the Facilities Committee.
Yes.
To, or it was the Chairman of the Facilities Committee, myself and Milford and Noel to enter into an agreement with Municipal Engineering. If you recall, that was the firm that we interviewed and selected for that. We have met on that and have entered into an agreement with them. Milford was here earlier, but he's very comfortable with the fees. So I wanted to go through this with you. And I do have copies of a copy of the agreement. We can make hard copies for you if anybody wants one. But Municipal Engineering is out of Garner. Just, you may have heard the name already because we use them at our landfill site. I might also add that both Fremont and Pikeville, I believe, I know that Fremont uses them. And so that's also a plus. But we were very pleased with their background. They specialize strictly in civil engineering for municipal governments, which means cities and counties. So here's what they're proposing is, let me get to the
thing here. Okay, the first part is a $5,200 on the Grantham. This is if we can go on-site. I've split this out between if you could go on-site or if you needed a pump station. Now, we've recently gotten good news on the Grantham site. We can use the athletic fields as the drain fields. It takes a little more treatment and everything, but you can use those. And as y'all know, that's a large part of that site. Probably half of it's taken up with athletic fields. So the $5,200 is the initial soils report and pre-application meeting. That pre-application meeting is with with the Department of Health and Human Services. What you have to do is take soil borings and determine the types of soils, because different soils have different absorption rates. And what this is all about is the absorption rate of those soils out there. So he'll do that initially. Based on that, they'll make a determination if they think we can go on site. If we can, obviously that's the cheaper option than putting in 7 miles of force main and a pump station, which is the next one. If they can do that, then they have a $68,000 lump sum. This is for the detailed soils work, engineering, design, drawings, and specs, and permitting assistance. This is an estimate based on their hourly rates. And the reason that we agreed to that is you can't really know that until we know exactly what we've got out there. And so, but his rates are within the contract on an hourly rate, and that's an estimation of the hours to be used in it. The next thing is the $45,000 is a lump sum, and that's contract construction admin, including bidding and awards. And construction, now they had construction observation based on construction period. We did not choose to do that, okay? And so we'll leave that at that. That was the $15,000. Now, the pump station actually costs less from an engineering standpoint, but it costs more to put it in from a construction standpoint. So even though it shows as being the cheaper option from a fee standpoint, ideally what we want is to be able to put that wastewater treatment facility at the Grantham site, and that's what we're trying to get to. And again, we would not do the $15,000 hourly estimate on the, because Milford and his people would be doing more of the day-to-day oversight on that.
Could I ask, this 15,000 hourly estimate, you're talking about that's the total fee for their hourly work?
No, that would be if you were using the, if you had them do almost daily inspection of it. There's a certain amount of inspection that's done about once a week. This would be if you were gonna have them there on site all the time. And what we said is, we don't want you to do that. We got people that can do that. So we're trying to save some money there, but we think we can do that. So that's the Grantham site. Does anybody have any questions on that?
I do have one.
Okay.
So you said the Grantham on-site septic system, you can use the athletic fields as drain fields?
Yes.
Okay. My understanding was you won't be able to because of geothermals they will be using there.
We think there are areas where they've got that, and there's areas they don't. You just have, what we're getting is their site plan, see where they've got that, and see where we've got areas that can do that.
And the good news about that is that, I don't know if you're aware, but at one point, we were thinking that we were gonna have to possibly purchase some more property for this, but
Yeah.
now hopefully we won't have to.
Yeah, we just gotta wait and see how all of this plays out, but that's where we're at right now. So they have started work on all of this, and wanted y'all to be aware of that. Now, that's Grantham. On Spring Creek, we're about 4/10 of a mile from the nearest manhole to the Spring Creek site. So the only question there is whether the sewer from Spring Creek is going to flow gravity, or if we're gonna have to use a pump station and a force main to get it to that nearest manhole. And we won't know that until we take the inverts, see what the elevations are there, and then you'll be able to shoot those, and we'll know pretty quickly which way we're going on this one, okay? And what we're doing there is the initial survey to determine if gravity option is available is $2,800. Now, I put that under both options because you're gonna do that regardless. Whichever option you pick, we will have done that. Then you got engineering design and plan specifications and permitting assistance for gravity sewer is 16.5 lump sum. LS stands for lump sum. Engineering design drawings and specs and permitting assistance for pump station option is $35,000. So that's under the force main part. Then 17.5 under Spring Creek gravity would be for contract admin, including bid and award gravity sewer. And the other would be $35,000 if you had to do a pump station. And remember, the pump station also includes that you've got about 7 miles of force main. That's what we've done. That assumes you would ride the DOT's right of way on that. So that's what we've come up with. And again, we did not take the $7,500 hourly construction for one and $15,000 for the other. So that's basically what the contracts say. And on each one, they'll have to do the initial assessment, and then we'll decide which option we have to take on each one. And of course, we'll be back to you with that. But that work has begun, and I simply wanted to make you aware of that because y'all had authorized us to go ahead and do this. Does anybody have any questions on that? Okay, the next thing I gave you is the Facilities Committee met. One of the proposals that we had from Milford was to look at relocating the majority of the IT operation. They're currently in this very small building back behind this office. I think it's called the old law library, and that's what it functioned as. So what we're wanting to do is move the majority of his people over to the house that you bought on Herman Street next to the health department. Is everybody familiar with that? It is a much bigger space. That won't take a whole lot of money to put that in order. The main thing there is we've got to run a fiber optic line there, and Milford is taking care of that. So when we do that, then what we're looking at, I've given you in paragraph 2. The first one has to do with Blake Proctor and Pikeville. Paragraph 2 talks about this. So what would happen is in the smaller old law library building, and you may not be aware of this, is there's actually 2 buildings back there. I had in my head it was 1 building, but it's actually 2. One has 2 offices, one has 3 offices. So in the smaller one, he and his administrative assistant would stay there. 3 of his analyst positions were in the larger one. And one, he has, in the county office building, 3 of his analyst positions there. And then in the Goldsboro Library, he has 1 analyst who's paid by library funds but is supervised by Steve. And then in the offices on the 4th floor, we have Chris Stone. Now, Chris Stone will stay where he is because we have so much stuff in this building. We need 1 person staying right here. So what where we want to go with it is in the smaller old law library building, he and his administrative assistant would stay there. In the larger old law office, vacate these 3 offices and put them up for rent unless we have a county operation that we can use it. Pam and I have discussed the need for more space in her department, and we may look at that first. So I will get back with the Facilities Committee on that. In the county office building, DSS, we would keep one of these 3 offices for use when one of his technicians is working on DSS computers. But that would release the 2 others for DSS, which needs the space. In the Goldsboro Library, it would remain as is, and Chris Stone would remain as he is on the 4th floor in the server area. In the renovated house on Herman Street, we relocate the other 6 personnel that are vacating the old library and the DSS areas. So that's why we need a larger space. It also, the plan for that also gives them 2 more workspaces and storage area, which they're very cramped for right now. That's pretty much what we're trying to do there. If you look at the second page, that's a layout of the IT department floor plan in that 401 North Herman Street. And you'll notice down at the bottom part, you have computer work area, you have new storage areas and an equipment room, and then they have a training room. So this gives them more room in which to operate, and it frees up some other space for us. The Facilities Committee approved all of this, and we wanted to make y'all aware that we were doing this so that everybody stayed in the loop on what was going on there. And again, with the offices here in the old law library, the 3 that we're vacating, I'll be getting with Pam on that as to what we may do there. And if we determine that we don't need them initially, then we can look at renting those out. Because obviously, office space directly next to the courthouse is at a pretty high premium for law offices. That's where they want to be. And that's everything I had, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Mayor.
Did, refresh my memory, did we come up with what cost would be involved in this move?
I believe the only cost was that fiber optics, because he's already, the building is in good shape right now.
And moving, of course.
Yeah, and the moving.
What the labor.
Right. And the fiber optics is right at the health department, so we're literally talking about going next door.
So we're really not gonna spend a lot of money, but to be honest with you, the Facilities Committee felt like that we should share this with the commissioners as a matter of transparency. This is probably something that normally would not come before the commission board, but we just felt like that the board needed to know what we're doing, so for future reference.
Right.
And you know, this is one of the parcels that we just purchased.
Yeah.
And this partly describes, you know, or explains the justification in buying it to start with.
That's right. That's all I've got, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Board of Commissioners Committee reports and comments. Mr. Bell's not here. Mr. Pate.
Yes, sir. Since it's been such a long day, I'm gonna skip the majority of what I was going to talk about. Did mention a Purple Heart banquet. I got an echo here.
Yeah.
I don't like the way it sounds. I'll speak loud enough where you can hear me. That's gonna be 7 o'clock on Thursday, and tying in with the veterans and what I had to say today, there's also been another event that's taken place with our cemetery, the Veterans Cemetery. Mr. Parker called me last night to tell me about it, and today he put this in my hand. This is the deed where the property has been given over to the state, so that can move forward. Is there anything else to that, Mr. Parker?
That's it.
But I just wanted y'all to see what it looked like.
That's the deed to what now?
It's the property that we had deeded over to the state for the cemetery.
Oh,
Now,
great.
when Mr. Panay was here describing what he was doing, he was saying it was somebody in the Attorney General's.
Right.
Well, apparently finally got off their desk, so we have recorded the deed.
So it does move forward too. Last Monday at our DSS meeting, and I want to thank that board over there. I've been elected, I don't know if I'm thanking them or not, I've been elected the chairman of that board, and Mr. Amaya is going to be the vice chair. And so look forward to this coming year over there. I had a chance to meet with RCC the other day, and I enjoyed meeting with them. And I got there a little early to ask some questions, because you may have heard me talk about broadband for the rural areas of the county. Because those towers, the one we're building, is only 180 feet, Seven Springs is not in the line of sight, so that's not gonna be an option at this point, bringing broadband to Seven Springs. And then, of course, they explained to me that we don't own the other tower over there, and it would be a pretty expensive proposition to put additional equipment over there. But having said that, I want the folks at Seven Springs to know that I'm not through with this issue, and I will push forward with it. And I'm just gonna skip the rest of it because it's been a long day. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Martin?
Most everything that I've gone to, the rest of you went to the receptions and so forth, and I did want to bring attention to one. I went on the 21st, I went to Wayne Community College at the invitation of a retired gentleman of Mr. Barnwell, happens to live in my district. He invited me to come out to the Retired Military Alliance meeting. And, you never know what he's going to hear. There was a presentation made by, he described himself as the state, and I probably will insult him by saying the liaison, I'm not sure he was the director of the veterans support group. He directed to the governor, and I don't have that piece of paper with me, but the importance of it was that he was there to assure the veterans in our area that they always had a telephone number to turn to, and the state was there to help them, and it was a very good meeting. It was well received by the attendees. But I did have an opportunity to share our local veterans' opportunity for them, because I would not want it to be said that Wayne County did not have its own service to veterans, and I know that we do. We have office, and I made that aware to them and gave them the telephone number as to how to reach it. And my fellow commissioners, I did say that per the district you live in, please call your county commissioner if you have any needs, because that's the quickest way for us to get them in touch with someone. I had our office back here several weeks ago too, and Mr. Wood and the secretary followed up on a request from a specific retiree that we had who he felt like he was having some difficulties, and thank you for what you all have done where he's concerned. I haven't heard from him lately, but I intend to meet with him and see if he's doing fine. But I just wanted to say that, and I know that everyone is concerned about the VA and all of that, but I just feel good about what our veterans heard that night and what I feel like we have for them in this county. That's the most important one that I felt like I attended since we were all together the last time. Thank you, sir. That's it for me.
Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry, I forgot something that was very important, if you don't mind. That same morning that you went to the, I went over here to the Veterans Memorial to see Mr. Herbert Scott receive his medals.
Oh, yeah.
That, and this gentleman was like 92 or something like that. He had not received his medals for the occupation in Japan, or two Victory Medal, Korean Service Medal, Silver Star, representing 5 campaigns, United Nations Service Medal, National Defense Service Medal. And I was just amazed, and especially the physical condition that man was in at his age. I'm sure I'll be long buried by the time I get that old. But it was well attended, and I was just proud to see someone like that finally get there to do what they deserve. Thank you.
Mr. Dodd?
Well, my fellow commissioner didn't mention it, but I'm going to mention it. I really enjoyed, and I'm sure we all did, enjoyed the celebration at the Steele Memorial Library. That opening really was special to see that facility open, and it was made possible by saving the local taxpayers over $1 million in that process. Special congratulations to all that worked for many months and years to see that project completed. The EMS met with the fire chiefs and department heads and others to update on the status of improving and implementing the enhancements to our communication system. There are many hurdles that have to be overcome and have had to be overcome, but we are now kind of on a schedule of getting those much needed improvements. Several of us attended the 117, the I-795 design feasibility meeting in Raleigh, and there were several proposals that were presented to extend I-795 to I-40. conditional upon us getting funding. Many concerns were discussed in an attempt to find the most efficient and effective way to complete this section of Interstate 795. I'm pleased to accept my position on the Gateway Board with Commissioner Gurley, Brent Heath, and Dr. Jerry Grimes to represent the rural side of Gateway. It is my hope to find the best and most efficient way to provide public transportation to all of our citizens in Wayne County. Now, the board did take action on its first meeting. It did restore the methodology of charging by the trip rather than by the mile, effective August the 1st. The board agreed to charge the rate of $12 per trip, effective August the 1st, replacing the old rate per trip of $8. We agreed also to review that rate and its effectiveness after 3 months of billing. And lastly, the band at Charles B. Aycock needs some individual, company, and corporate sponsors to help offset their expenses. I know you say, well, Joe, why are you involved with that? It's out of your district. But
You are a county commissioner.
That's right.
But anyway, Michael Palmer, the director of bands there, had asked me to ask anyone that you may know to encourage them to make donations because they've had such exciting growth in the band at Charles B. Aycock. With that growth comes more instruments, more instruction, and more accessories. We understand the economy is placing a strain on many small businesses and that you are receiving more requests than you can support. However, we know that in order for us to have a great community music, we need community support. You can contact him at Charles B. Aycock. Again, his name is Michael Palmer, or you can reach him on email at michaelpalmer@wcps.org. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Tony. Mr. Mayor.
I timed mine last night, Mr. Chairman, it was like 36 minutes, but I think,
I still got it.
but everybody else has already hit on most of mine, so I'm down to about 5, okay? July 17th, we had an RPO meeting down in Mount Olive, and of course, we've talked about this already, about our dissatisfaction with the formula. And I mention this every meeting I go to, so you're gonna hear me harp on this situation until something is done. Of course, without going into details, we've already heard from our county manager and myself about all the facilities meetings that we've been involved in this week. Last week, I think we've had 2 or 3 over the last couple of weeks since our last commissioner meeting. On the 22nd, I did go to the Friends of Seymour meeting. McGuire Woods gave a presentation informing us of a strategy moving forward to protect Seymour Johnson Air Force Base, which includes the Dare County Bombing Range. We think that we're in the clear on wind farms since the legislation was passed. Let me tell you, we aren't. We are not. There's loopholes here, and we're dealing with that. So we need to keep that in mind. Let's see, bounce over. We had I figured the chairman might would touch on this, but we had a communications update on the 24th of July at the Belfast Fire Department on our RCC completion date. And there has been some weather issues and a few other issues that, if I'm correct in my notes, that the completion date has been moved to like April of 2015, is that correct?
That's the worst case scenario.
Worst case scenario. So there's been a lot of reasons why this has taken place. It's just one of those things that's like our chairman said, you know, you take one step forward and 2 backwards. So sometimes that happens. On the 28th, I attended my first Wayne County Social Services Board meeting, and I knew as soon as I sat down, the first best thing I do is keep my mouth shut. No, I'm just kidding. No, it was very, very enlightening. I really enjoyed sitting there at this first meeting, and I want to pick out just a couple of things. North Carolina has received approximately 90,000 applications submitted through healthcare.gov that must be evaluated for Medicaid eligibility. 90,000. And we as a state have got to evaluate every one of these applications. And most counties are stretched to the limit on getting this done. So that's something that was brought up. Number two is that, as we discussed earlier about transportation, Debbie Jones, our director, has signed a new transportation contract with Between Bridges, and I want to just mention a little bit about why and how that's taken place. Between Bridges is a very small transportation company that specializes in transporting mentally ill clients, physically disabled senior citizens, and clients who have difficulties that inhibit them from riding the Gateway transportation system. They are transporting about 10 individuals per day by the Medicaid transportation program. So it says these are specialists specializing in those clients who have to leave home. Now get this is maybe Gateway. You people on the Gateway board might want to listen to this. They are specializing in those clients who have to leave home for medical appointments earlier or later than Gateway operates, who need to attend out-of-town appointments on days that Gateway does not run out-of-town trips, and those clients that Gateway has suspended from their services. So we're mandated by statutes to provide transportation for Medicaid people, no matter what we have to do. So the idea that the board needs to use Gateway on everything is a good idea, but in some cases, like these 10 cases, approximately per day, it's impossible for us to use Gateway. Now, I'm going to go back to my drum and say, if we put a satellite location possibly in the southern part of the county and northern part of the county, would it help this situation? How about taking a look at it, Commissioner Dodd, okay?
Talk to the vice chairman right over there.
And also, Commissioner Gurley. I think one of the things that I want to mention lastly is that on July 30th, I attended for a short period of time because I went to the 795 meeting over in Raleigh also. But at North Wayne, there was a sewer line smoke test run by facilities. And I had to leave before any results. I will say that there are issues at North Wayne, but I was not able to go to the Charles B. Aycock that was tested. But the email I have from Mike McAllister, who conducted the engineer, there are major issues at Charles B. Aycock. And just real quick, just from what I remember of the email, is that all the water, rainwater from the ball fields and the buildings are running into a wet well place, and it's being pumped straight into the sewer. So we are trying to help Fremont, as y'all know, trying to help Fremont find the problem of these so-called overcharges that they're paying to Goldsboro. Well, we're not charging for the right amount of sewer that's coming out of Charles B. Aycock. That's going to be corrected, and we're addressing that. So I thought that was very interesting. But the key is that it's helping to correct the situation that Fremont and even Eureka's in to a certain degree. And we're getting there slowly but surely. And the Milford Smith, the director, our facility director, is helping with this situation on a volunteer basis, just offering his help. I won't say anything about the 795 I-40 because Commissioner Daugherty covered that really well. That's all I have, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Gurley.
Mr. Mayo, I listened to your transportation report with keen interest, and I heard you clearly. And Commissioner Daugherty and I will address it as soon as we can. I did have a chance to go to my first Goldsboro Tourism Council meeting and inform and remind everyone of Beat Week, which is be our festival September 10th through 12th. It'll be a fun-filled weekend of arts, crafts, and entertainment, and there'll be more of that to come later. And as Mr. Daugherty mentioned earlier, the Steele Memorial Library opening was well attended, and I'm sure Commissioner J.D. Evans is looking down smiling during that event. And lastly, Mr. Chairman, I want to emphasize, schools will be going back in session in just a few weeks now, and remind the Board of Commissioners and our school officials and all of our citizens that we need to take a interest and begin a culture of safety for everyone, especially around our schools and streets and roads and parking lots. And again, we begin this culture of safety for all, and especially our kids. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Gurley. Most of the events that I've attended has already been mentioned, so we're going to skip over them. I do want to, Mr. Mayo mentioned the meeting we had out at Belfast. We had not only fire, EMS, law enforcement, all of the end users on the radio system had representatives there, and I want to thank the commissioners for being there also. Really, I want to thank Mr. Wood and Mel and his staff for putting together the program. Thought it was well presented. I've got some real positive feedback from it. I think one of the main things that we were kind of dropping the ball on, we've been communicating with the users more, but I think this sit-down meeting really got their attention, and I've got some positive feedbacks that they know now, they've known the whole time, but they really see now our concern in getting this communication system fixed. And as many of y'all know, OES has a meeting every Thursday with RCC. It may be lengthy sometime, or they may just go over a few items, but they have that meeting every Thursday. It's usually somewhere between 10 and 11, depending on how much that they need to discuss, whether it starts at 10 or 11. And last week, Mr. Pate attended, and I want to thank Bill for being there, because I think he learned some things that or heard some things that he really needed to hear. Mr. Parker mentioned a while ago that, you know, the agreement has been signed and we have a copy back from the previous radio company, but without going into detail, if you go to some of these meetings, you'll learn some things or hear some things that Mr. Pate heard last week that will set you on fire all over again. I'm not going to go into detail at this meeting, but me and Mr. Pate, either one, will discuss some of those issues if you would like to. But I encourage y'all, as long as we don't have but 3 there, I encourage some of y'all to come to those, not every meeting, but if you can come once in a while, you can get some real enlightening information. And I think Mr. Pate will agree with me. Even if it comes to the point that I don't have to go, if 3 others wants to go, I can miss some meetings. But I just encourage some of y'all to start going to those meetings when you can. And that's all I have, gentlemen.
Mr. Chairman, if I could make a correction here. When I stated that the $12 per trip charge, that was in county only, and I should have stated that. So that $12 per trip in county. If it's out of county, it's a different rate. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Martin.
Mr. Daugherty brought that up. I was going to get one little bit of correction. That's $12 one direction, $12 back the other direction.
That's
in
correct.
county.
That's correct.
And that's if a person in that previous suggested $3.62 per person per month, that would have been a 40-mile round trip. The way my calculator said, it would have been $144. So, am I to think that you have gotten the figure down back to $24? Y'all talking about a piece of negotiating from what I had heard. I want to personally thank you, Mr. Wood, if and everybody else who worked on that. they got that feedback into a reasonable. That's
We're
a
working it.
reasonable, I mean, a lot of our vehicles will take $12 worth of gas to come to Goldsboro, $12 to go back, if not more. So that is a reasonable figure. That's reasonable.
Well, I think the board recognized that we have issues with Medicaid and with the AAA as far as approving the rates that were in effect, that went into effect in February. And so this is a recognition of that. It was starting to impact ridership, and so I think the makeup of the board, of course, it's substantially changed. They went in and got that adjusted, and as Commissioner Doherty said, they're going to look at it at the end of 90 days, because, you know, we all want it to be financially solvent, but we felt like the rates were too high, and so now we'll take a look at it, and we'll have 90 days to look at it and see what we've got from here on out. But we need to grow that fund balance realistically, but not too fast.
Thank you, sir.
Otherwise,
We all
we're going to
recognize.
price people out.
Anyone else?
Good piece of work.
Anyone else?
Mr. Chairman, I did overlook one thing, just didn't want to forget it. I think we said at the last meeting that Commissioner Mayo and I had met with officials down at Mount Olive. I think that's been in the press as well about the airport down there. We have come to terms on an agreement, and I think we went over that with you 2 weeks ago. Mr. Parker is in the process of drafting that agreement now, running it by the attorney in Mount Olive. But Charles Brown and I signed off on what the bullet points are, that we were in agreement. Also ran that back through Ray. Ray was in agreement that, yes, that's what we said. So I did all of that before I gave it to Borden. He should have the agreement for you, and we hope to have it for you at the next meeting on the 19th, and then we can put that one to bed. That's one more issue should be taken care of.
Anyone else?
I move adjournment.
I have a motion on the floor, we adjourn. All in